everybody. It's great to see so many people here. As I said, my name's Jackie Finn, and I'm from a company called Cambridge Consultants. And if anybody doesn't know who we are, just take 1 minute to explain. We're a global product development and tech strategy company. We've been going for about 60 years now. And in the healthcare domain, we tend to work with pharma, biotech, medtech, and consumer tech, working on, say, smart, connected, usually regulated medical devices and the digital ecosystems that go around them. So for the next, I think it's 10, 15 minutes or so, what I want to do is talk to you about how technology, and mainly sensing AI and the actionable insights that you can derive from them, are set to change the way we both design and carry out and indeed interpret all the outcomes from clinical trials. So just taking a step back a minute so we kind of all are singing from the same hymn sheet. Clinical trials at the moment tend to be state-of-the-art, as we know, in terms of they're paper-based. And we're moving away from that, and that's fine, but really the majority of them are paper-based, and I think it belies the fact that it takes about 2.6 billion, about 12 years to bring a drug to market. And of those 12 years, on average, about 7 of those years are spent in the clinical trial phase. So of course, the more costly and the more time-consuming that clinical trial is, the less the window of opportunity financially for the pharma companies to make their money before the patent expires. So anything that digital can do to kind of reduce that or increase the efficiency and reduce the cost would be really, really welcome. And so if you've got these rising costs of clinical trials that are going on, coupled to the commercial risk of failure, and there's about 80% of trials don't go through to completion, it really makes sense to harness the power of mobile human data so that you can start to get deeper clinical insight, better design your trials, and also better understand outcomes. And I'll go into that really in the main bulk of this. So currently, the average dropout rate across all the phases of a trial is around 30%. And just to put that into context, when you're doing a phase 3 trial in a drug, most of you may already know this, there's about 2,000 to 3,000 people in there. So if you're having to constantly recruit and onboard people, it's just becoming a money pit, and it's pushing that time out constantly. So what's behind this huge withdrawal rate? Is it just a poor trial design, or would people have worked that out by now? Are there other factors at play? And we think that there are other factors. And we think that chronic stress may impact trial outcomes. And that's really in the context of trials around chronic conditions. So what can you do about that? Because what you really need to do is measure people's stress levels in a trial so that you can understand if that is indeed a confounding factor and if it's obfuscating the results and not making them interpretable. Let's just understand chronic stress a bit more. There are 2 types of stress, right? There's our acute stress that we have every day. It's good for us, it boosts our immune system, and it helps us focus, and it helps us get things done. But the endocrinology, the profile of adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol spiking goes up and down quite quickly. But chronic stress is a completely different thing. Chronic stress is where we have constantly elevated and very dangerous levels of cortisol. Cortisol is known as our stress hormone. And that in turn causes pathophysiological effects on our body, and it disrupts the normal homeostasis of things like our endocrine and our immune and our metabolic system. In terms of our metabolic system, things may not be absorbed and digested as they normally would. And that in turn causes chronic illnesses. So things like type 2 diabetes, chronic heart disease and strokes and things like that are all affected by chronic stress. Now, chronic stress rarely, if you have it as a condition, it rarely exists in isolation. People tend to have a comorbidity of depression and anxiety running alongside it. So if you look at like type 2 diabetes, that patient cohort tends to run at about 40% with a comorbidity of depression and anxiety. So if stress is impacting how we behave and it's impacting how our body is behaving, then in the context of a trial around a chronic condition, we need to be taking into effect the impact that stress is having. But to do that, and to do it in a continuous real-time way, you can't really take cortisol. Cortisol is quite invasive to take. You have to take blood and saliva. Cortisol is the ultimate truth data for this. So you need to develop a proxy system. And this is where technology can come in, because if you can develop an AI-driven stress monitoring system, and you can use sensing, then you've got a far better way of understanding what's going on continuously, and you're developing these real-time contextualized data sets that allow you to make far more informed decisions, as we'll see in a minute. So that's what we did last year. We developed a platform called Verum, and we had one goal in mind, and that was, and this was in collaboration with clinical psychiatrists and neuroscientists at a UK hospital, we wanted to accurately predict stress levels with the fewest sensor measurements possible. Because in the real world, if we're continuously monitoring somebody, a system to do that has to be really user-friendly and quite simple. And when we looked at all of the literature, and there's some really great academic papers out there, they talk about quite a lot of sensors that you would need to use to accurately predict stress. And we thought, well, that's probably done on volunteers that are put in a lab and they're sedentary, and you can place the sensors on them and they don't fall off and they're not moving around, and they're really accurately being able to collect this data, and it's reliable. But we thought in the real world, that's not how it works. So to set up an unobtrusive system, we started off being as obtrusive as possible. And so we took 8 different biometric sensors and put them on our bodies. We had 10 volunteers taking biometric sensors for 12 hours a day, 4 days each, so that we were getting lots of data. And so we had lots of different types of sensors. We had 4 medical grade sensors, and they were EMG on our trapezius muscle here, so essentially looking at how our muscle tenses up and gets tighter with stress over the day. We had ECG, EDA, or electrodermal activity, and that was measured on this fleshy parts of our fingers, and respiration. They were all done at medical grade, so we were gathering data at 500 samples per second. And then at the other end of the scale, we had Fitbit, consumer grade sensors, and they were gathering accelerometer and sleep quality and duration. We also had a pupil tracking and pupil gaze piece of software, and that was gathering data really sporadically, in fact, whenever we were sat at our desks, and everything in between. So we had 8 different sensors, and that really gave us a feel for just how uncomfortable a lot of the sensors can be when you're wearing them for like 12 hours, and also how prone to misplacement, some of them, particularly EMG, are. Because if you don't put the sensors accurately on the back, you won't get them across a muscle fiber, and then you end up just not measuring any data at all. So that has to be taken into consideration. Now, of course, we couldn't train our algorithm on cortisol, so we had to train it on self-reported stress. So in collaboration with our clinical psychiatrists, we put together 3 state-of-the-art stress test questionnaires, and we adapted them from the paper-based format into an app. So we created an app, and that app alarmed every 2 hours in the day that we were wearing this kit, and we had to fill in these questionnaires on how stressed we were, and we had to capture our voice. So we had to say a particular sentence which, over and over again, which captures all the key phonemes that, and vowels that you would need to kind of train the algorithm. And then we had to put contextual information in about what we were doing and how active we were, all of that kind of stuff. So lots and lots of data, lots and lots of inputs to develop the algorithm. And we used 4 different machine learning regression techniques, and we did 256 different sensor combinations. And the data scientists basically looked at what were the fewest we could get away with for accurately predicting stress. And it was a real breakthrough, because we found actually that there are 3 different sensor inputs that you can use to predict stress, EDA, or electrodermal activity, as I was saying, and that represents your sympathetic nervous system. Then you have EMG or ECG, they're interchangeable, and they both represent electrical impulses over the muscle, and then voice. But actually, so you think that's great, okay, I've got my 3. But then we went into a design workshop and thought, how are we going to create a user-friendly wearable that has EDA and EMG, or EDA and ECG? And you can't really. So the next set of sensors that were just as good, just slightly larger average error, but really not that much, were the EMG and voice. And that's what we did to set about creating this kind of user-friendly system, if you like, that people could use in a clinical trial on their patients. So we created a vest, and we put the EMG sensor in it. And because of the feedback from myself and others included about how difficult it is to place that sensor, we've created an orientation-independent sensor that dynamically updates and changes as you move about. And then we've created an app, and that app would be like a daily diary that the person would fill in. And again, we did a lot of user experience in designing that because we had to try to passively acquire data, such as if you're logging your alcohol and your caffeine and your cigarette intake and things like that on MyFitnessPal, you'd pull that into it. If you're logging your sleep quality and duration and all of the other bits that a Fitbit does, you'd pull that into it as well. So on your daily diary, you're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to fill it in and kind of accept or slightly edit the information that is being presented to them rather than them actually putting it in themselves. But of course, that's just one side of the coin. You can do a really fantastic system, but if you don't then take the actionable insights that you've generated from it and provide them to the right people at the right time, they're not going to be able to improve outcomes. So then what we did was create a widget for a clinical trial management system dashboard. Any dashboard would just integrate into an existing workflow. And I know it's probably hard to see here, but essentially you can go from a population level. Here's like a 6x36 matrix of patients, anonymized, color-coded. The red shows the biometrics and the AI predictions of how stressed they are. It's important just to let you know that the predictions gave you a single numerical estimator of your stress, just from an arbitrary 1 to 16. So the darker the red, the more stressed that person has been over that last time period, which I believe is 24 hours on this. So you can quickly identify somebody with high stress levels. You can look at the contextual information that behind it from their daily diary, and you can look at any triggers and alerts that are coming in real time. So they've had a lot of alcohol the night before, and that might be of interest to the trial coordinators because it might be messing up how that drug is supposed to interact. You can get all of that information. And when you find somebody, you can then drill down into them. This is like a 30-day timeline of that individual, so you can get some much more richer contextualized information about them. So here you can see this person is starting to not comply. The very first questionnaire on the daily diary is, have you taken your medicine today, yes or no? So you can see if they're not complying. You can start to overlay various parts of data, such as how many triggers and alerts they've had, what's their sleep quality and duration. You can actually pull in adverse drug events from the other ePro systems that are coming into the dashboard. You can also start to see trends. So you can see trends of how the chronic stress is building up over time and how heart rate variability is decreasing. And all of this really allows you to be far more proactive as a clinical trial coordinator. You can reach out to people swiftly if they're having adverse drug events. And it allows for richer conversations when the nurses next have these face-to-face conversations with people. And people aren't having to remember, did I have a bad day that day? I can't remember why I didn't comply. All of that, the context around why people aren't complying can possibly be investigated. So in summary, the real-time contextualized data sets that you're able to pull out from technology like sensing and AI and kind of wearables and remote monitoring, I think it's really, really good to be able to provide deeper insight and facilitate much more informed decisions and conversations. And all of that really allows us to try to increase the likelihood of completing a trial and having interpretable results from that trial. So platforms like the one that we've developed, they can measure and monitor anything, but in the context of this particular example where we're monitoring stress, you can see that you can start to investigate stress as a confounding factor if people are not responding. You can start to understand why. And I think really importantly, it allows you to do adaptive trial enrichment, and that's really started to come of age, whereby we can take these real-time contextualized data sets and we can have interim stage gates where we look at the data and we look at the different cohorts and we can start to enrich those responders versus the non-responders. And that's not to say that we're biasing the outcome of the results. We're just trying to get interpretable results that aren't being obfuscated by confounding factors such as stress. And we can do that with these types of platforms. As we've seen, we can also do better profiling of drugs and adverse events, and the real-time nature of this data coming into dashboards allows us to reach out to people. And I think that in turn allows people to feel that they're better cared for in a clinical trial, because that continuous monitoring should hopefully mitigate that effect of non-compliance. So with that very brief tour, I've got the wrong one. There was an extra slide in here which said, please come to our booth. There's an open invitation to come to our booth, which is, and I'm trying to remember,
44337.
There we go, 44337. Thank you, down below, 2 floors down. And we'll be delighted to come and talk to you in more detail about everything that I've shown here today. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and wish you the very best for the rest of CES. Thank you.